Donna. Hi, Chastity. Hi, Anna. We're going to go ahead and get started in the interest of time. Um, Welcome again, and thanks for joining us today. I really do want to acknowledge just how much there is going on in the world these days and just how grateful we are for everyone's time and attention to this issue. As a very quick reminder, this webinar is off the record and
Thank
closed to the
you.
media. So if you are a reporter or a journalist, we would ask that you please log off and reach out to Tahirih directly after the webinar is over. For everyone else, you are welcome to use the Q&A feature in your Zoom toolbar. If you don't see it in your toolbar, just hit the three dots above the word more, and you should see a box that is labeled with Q&A. In that box is where you can ask questions as we go along. And as time allows, we may get to those questions at the end, or we may have to follow up with attendees via email. By way of very brief introduction, my name is Casey Carter Swegman, and I am the Policy Director at the Tahirih Justice Center. The Tahirih Justice Center was founded in 1997, and we are a national nonprofit that provides free legal and social services to immigrant survivors of gender-based violence out of our 5 regional offices in Baltimore, Maryland, Falls Church, Virginia, Houston, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, and in the Bay Area in California. Our forced marriage initiative has been providing wraparound services to individuals at risk and survivors of forced and child marriage anywhere in the United States since 2011. Since then, the direct services work of our forced marriage initiative has impacted over 3,000 individuals. And it is those experiences and our ongoing consultations and conversations with survivors that have informed our policy priorities. And I'm hoping that a member of my team will be able to share our full policy platform document in the chat. And if not, we'll certainly send that out to everyone later. And without further ado, I will take a moment to introduce our presenters for today, because you'll mostly be hearing from them and much less from me. First, we have Chastity Burns, who is the Deputy General Counsel at the U.S. Senate Committee on the Judiciary for Senator Richard Durbin in Illinois. And we have been working on this legislation for a very long time, and I am tremendously grateful for her commitment and her tireless work on this particular piece of legislation. Next, we have Anna Whitwam, who is a legislative assistant in the office of Congresswoman Gwen Moore, who represents the 4th District of Wisconsin. And finally, we have our survivor advocates and experts with us today. And I'll start with Dr. Judy Wiegand, who is a licensed physical therapist with more than 20 years of clinical experience. She primarily works with children, including those with special needs. As a survivor of child marriage, she began her advocacy alongside Tahirih in 2018 in Kentucky, where she lives. And since then, Judy has provided oral and written testimony in several states across the country in support of banning child marriage. Next, we have Naila Amin, who is a survivor, an activist, the founder of the Naila Amin Foundation, and a mother. The Naila Amin Foundation is dedicated to providing support and refuge to survivors of forced and child marriage and passing legislation to eliminate the legal pathways that enable minors to be married. As a survivor, Naila has been advocating to ban child marriage in the states across the country for almost a decade, and she led the effort that ultimately saw the end of child marriage in New York, where she is from. And finally, we have Donna Simmons, who is a child marriage survivor, a leader, and an advocate, as well as an author. She has supported efforts to ban child marriage in multiple states and currently leads the campaign to finally end child marriage in Kentucky. She is the founder of the Revive Collective and the Rise Kentucky Coalition, which is dedicated to helping survivors heal, break generational cycles, and build safer futures for the next generation. And before I hand it off to Donna, I would be remiss if I didn't take a moment to celebrate the reason why we are all here, which is the reintroduction of the Child Marriage Prevention Act. We are tremendously grateful to the champions of this legislation, including Senator Richard Durbin and Representative Gwen Moore, and to our co-sponsors, Representatives Raja Krishnamurthy and Danny Davis of Illinois, and in the House, and Senators Kirsten Gillibrand of New York and Brian Schatz of Hawaii. This bill was first introduced in 2024, and it is the first concerted effort by Congress to condemn and prevent child marriage domestically. You can find the bill text and other background information on the campaign at our new campaign website, which again, we will share in the chat as we go along. And finally, I am going to hand the microphone to a few of the brilliant survivor advocates who are here to educate us about the scope and the impact of child marriage in the US today. And then we will hear from our generous Hill colleagues who will walk us through what the Child Marriage Prevention Act would do to prevent these harms and help accelerate the end of child marriage in this country. So, Donna, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Casey. I appreciate that. And I wanted to take a moment to thank you all for your time engaging in this critical topic of conversation as it relates to ending child marriage and therefore enacting common sense child protection legislation. Now, as you can see on the slide in front of you, the 17 states that appear are ones that have ended child marriage once and for all in our country so far. And as encouraging as this map is, I do want to caution us against measuring success simply by whether a state passes a bill. The 17 states here have taken a critical step by recognizing that children deserve an absolute right to remain children, and they do deserve tremendous credit for that leadership. But we also have to be honest about what happens in states that claim progress while leaving dangerous gaps behind. And my home state of Kentucky is one of those examples. In 2018, Kentucky was praised for reforming its child marriage law. And up until then, since the year 2000, there had been nearly 11,000 cases of child marriage that had occurred right here in Kentucky alone. Now, with all of the progress that we had made, many people believed that child marriage issues here had effectively been solved. But the reality, unfortunately, is very different. The most recent data uncovered multiple counties that issued marriage licenses outside of the law itself, despite the safeguards that were supposed to prevent exactly that. The data identified violations in numerous counties, demonstrating that simply changing the statute did not guarantee compliance or accountability. And here's what concerns me even more. This isn't just about marriage laws being ignored. When an adult is illegally marrying a minor, we're often looking at potential violations of age of consent laws as well. And in some instances, minors, again, here in Kentucky, married to adults 10 and 12 years older than them after this law was declared to have been huge progress here in Kentucky. And those aren't technical paperwork errors. They represent children who may have been subjected to unlawful sexual exploitation before a marriage license was ever even issued. So when officials fail to follow the child marriage laws, they may also be overlooking crimes that exist to protect children from sexual abuse. And that is why enforcement matters just as much as legislation. A law without oversight is simply a promise on paper. A law without accountability is an invitation for someone to decide which children deserve protection and which children don't. Children should never have to rely on the knowledge, personal beliefs, or discretion of an individual county official to determine whether their rights will be protected. Protection should not depend on one zip code. It should not depend on whether the clerk understands the law. It should not depend on whether a judge asks enough questions. And it certainly should not depend on whether an adult predator can find a county willing to look the other way. So the lesson that Kentucky has taught us about states that have enacted progressive legislation without effectively ending child marriage altogether is that passing that legislation is only the first step. We must also create systems that verify compliance, investigate violations, and hold public officials accountable when they fail to protect children. Because if government cannot ensure that its own child protection laws are followed consistently, then we haven't truly ended child marriage. We've only created the illusion that we have. And now I want to hand it over to Nyla to talk about immigration law and child marriage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. And I'm so happy that we're finally in this place where we're actually discussing this Child Marriage Prevention Act. So basically, about immigration law and marriage in the United States. Current marriage-based visa laws, there is no minimum age set by statute for United States citizens or lawful permanent residents, petitioner of spouse and fiance visas. There's no minimum age set by statute for foreign-born beneficiaries of spouse and fiance visas. United States citizenship immigration sub-regulatory guidance requires consideration of marriage age law in intended state of residence. Proxy marriage law requires consummation, which incentivizes rape. Between 2007 and 2017, more than 8,500 marriage-based visa petitions involving at least one minor were approved by United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. And I'm actually talking about this today because this is the law that actually really affected my life. If it wasn't for this loophole in this law, I wouldn't have gotten Islamically married at 13, brought back to New York at 14, signed papers and have USCIS look at the paperwork and say, this girl's 14 and the man is 27, and they still stamped it approved. His first petition was approved. I want to know, why was there no safeguarding concerns raised? Why is it okay that the United States Immigration Services, they think that it's okay for a 14-year-old child to bring in a 27-year-old man? And it's happening vice versa too. Foreign born girls are coming into the country by older men, and this is literally the legal laundering of children through the United States Citizenship Immigration Services. And I think closing this loophole, we would protect our girls that are in our country, and we will be protecting the foreign born girls, because there is no minimum marriage age, and this is something that needs to end now.
Hello, this is Judy Wiegand. I appreciate you allowing me to be here and to speak to the information on child marriage in the United States. I guess I wanted to start out by saying too that when we're looking at this, that the vast majority of the child marriages that occur in the United States, and this is going to piggyback some of the things that the others have said also, this is usually underage females that are being married to males that are decades older than them. This could be a 13-year-old girl married to a 20-year-old man, or a 13-year-old girl married to a 50-year-old man. So the one thing, as Nala did say, that what is occurring is that this child is 13 years old and 14 years old. Anything under 16 is considered statutory rape. So individual states may have a pregnancy clause, and we've seen that a number of times. So with a pregnancy clause, then if the child is pregnant, then the parent can give consent, the couple can be legally wed. They're standing in the court or in the clergy, wherever the case may be, and there's evidence of statutory rape. But with parental consent, nobody helps that child. The parental coercion is very real. Any child looks towards their parent, their caregiver, supervisor, whoever it is that happens to be the parental figure for them, to try to guide them and give them information. The parents are then sometimes, usually, also guided by their community. That's neighbors, church, religion, whatever the community beliefs are. So that's where that guidance has come from. And then when that also occurs, then you just begun a years of allowing that child to be sexually violated, and then start a life of isolation. Child abuse, by definition, is when a child's health or welfare is harmed or threatened. And then when an adult who has custody or custodial rights, that sort of thing, now allows a child to be married, it's like they gave consent for a child to be abused. Maybe starting at 12, maybe starting at 13. So they just gave consent for this child to be abused for 5 years. Really doesn't make any sense how this happens. Personally, speaking to the isolation component, when I was married, I was isolated. I was married at 13 in the United States. I am a US citizen. And I was isolated from my family and my friends, the people that I really wanted to speak to the most. As a 13-year-old, that's what you do. So when we finally had a place that we could stay, that was our own, not really, but that it had no phone, no TV, no radio, no transportation, and no money. It felt like I was in jail. I couldn't go anywhere. I was just there. I was stuck in that location and with no access to anything. So again, the parent coercion is real. And that is one component of it. So then moving on, if we're looking at the physical impacts of child marriage, women who marry before the age of 19 have a 23% greater risk of developing serious health conditions like diabetes, cancer, heart attack, or stroke. Pretty scary stuff considering that you're also now talking about a child. Teen girls who marry tend to have more children at earlier ages, and then they're more closely spaced together. They are much more likely to be pregnant, 130%, as shown on the image. They're more likely to have children if they're married. So if it's one teen marrying another teen, versus if they're a teenager just living with a partner. So in addition to that, they're also more likely to have their first child before they're 18. And they're 40% more likely to have a second birth within 24 months of the first birth. And they're nearly 3 times more likely to have 5 children. So young women that are 16 to 19 are faced also too with that intimate partner violence, the victimization, and the rates are almost 3 times the national average. Personally, I do struggle with anxiety that I continue to have based on past issues, and I deal with it on a daily basis. And sometimes you have those situations where something triggers an old memory, and then you are not. It sort of comes out of nowhere. When we're talking about physical, also, and those things that can happen prolonged, the other part that I don't think is emphasized enough is that if a child is under 20 years old, early 20s, they're not biologically mature enough to have a child. So their body is still growing and everything is not where it would need to be or mature enough as it would need to be to actually sustain a pregnancy. And if you do sustain the pregnancy, then to continue that pregnancy to the end of the term and then to have a healthy child. I personally developed some issues when I was pregnant at 13 and then into 14. I gained a lot of weight. I had issues with blood pressure. I had a lot of water retention, that sort of thing. So when I did go into labor and I was at the hospital having a child, after my child was born, I was immediately put into ICU. And I was there for 1.5, maybe 2 days. I can honestly say that I do not remember being in ICU. I had the blood pressure increasing. I started hallucinating. It was just something that they were not ready for. And I was on, all the heart monitor. I was on other monitoring for stroke, seizure, brain injury, those sort of things, because my biologically, as a 14-year-old, a 13-year-old, or even in some cases, we've known two of 12-year-olds that are wed and then maybe also are having children, that you are setting them up for this increased mortality rate. I also could not get life insurance when I was pregnant because the mortality rate was so high. So after my child was born, then they would speak to my family about life insurance for me, but not before then. So the physical risks now and later are real. So it's not just about, can they get married? Here's a little problem. Let's tuck this away. This is multi-layered. There's multi-layers of problems here. And it all comes back to who is taking the most risk. And the most risk is being given to the underage child who has no skill to deal with this risk. They have no skill, or they have no developmental skill or emotionally developmental skill to be able to deal with what has just occurred or what's going to occur, but yet we're putting them in that situation.
Thank you so much. And
Yes,
maybe you were going to do the same thing, but I think
I was going to
Anna and
introduce
Nyla
yeah.
also wanted to speak to this slide too.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Hi. Just, I just want to add on basically to what Dr. Judy said. I think the physical impacts, after a while, everyone knows when your body can't take it anymore, things start to become psychosomatic. And at the age of 28, I was just in my peak of becoming an activist. And I remember like my fingers got like really dry and I just couldn't move them and they were cracking. So I went to the doctor and I found out I had psoriasis. And not only did I find out I had psoriasis, I'm one of the 45% of women who've developed arthritis with it. So now I've been on biologics since 2018. Every time I travel, I have to make sure the air hostesses, they know, hey, I have, biologics. You have to make sure ice. And after COVID, they just give you ice. And it's just your whole life changes physically, being 36 years old now, having a toddler running around, it's just not the same. There are days when I'm stressed out. I can't get up because I'm flared up, but I still have to get up. So, people need to understand this is like a domino effect. You put a child, she's in this worn, torn environment. And then after a while, when her little brain can't take anymore, her body literally starts to disintegrate and it becomes psychosomatic. And I just wanted to touch on that it's just more than physical. I mean, more than mental, because when mentally you can't handle it, it becomes physical. So thank you for letting me speak on that.
And Donna, please go ahead too.
Yes, and thank you to Dr. Judy as well as Nyla for sharing your all's personal experiences. I can certainly relate as it comes to the blood pressure issues. I am 42 years old and have been hospitalized twice because of stroke level blood pressure related to chronic panic attacks. That is comorbid with a few other diagnoses that I have from all the stress that I experienced very early in life, where that trauma stores itself in your body. Another part of the physical impact that I wanted to touch on very briefly is acknowledging that a lot of times in these situations where children are married, as a child, they do not have the ability, or maybe even there's a lack of knowledge of consenting to your own medical care. And that is something else that I experienced when I was 16 and I was married off to a 31-year-old man and I miscarried. And I could have died because my body went into toxic shock syndrome because not all of the placenta had come out. And because I could not consent to my own medical care and there was a delay, I ended up having to be hospitalized for that as well once my perpetrator finally agreed to consent to me having treatment at the hospital. So there's so many different layers of complication as it relates to both physical and mental health aspects. So just wanted to make sure that that was also mentioned. And Nyla, could you take us into the mental health aspects of underage marriage?
Of course, since this affected me morbidly.
Oh, yeah.
So basically, harms of child marriage, mental impacts. Women who marry before age 18 are more likely to report stressful life events. Women who marry before age 18 are also present with significantly more psychiatric disorders, including mood and anxiety disorders, including major depressive disorder, antisocial personality disorder, prevalence nearly 3 times higher. Social isolation and feeling a lack of control over their lives can contribute to a child bride's poor mental health. In fact, agencies working with girls facing or trying to escape forced marriages report that nearly all have contemplated or attempted suicide. I'm sharing something very personal. When I was married in Pakistan at 15 and I had to live with him, I remember trying to drink bleach in the bathroom because I just wanted it to be over. I was sick and tired of him walking all over my body, literally treating it like I was an object. So I was diagnosed with, I never knew what all that fluttering was. I was diagnosed in 2018. Every morning I was waking up, I was just constantly always nauseous, always throwing up. I got diagnosed with anxiety. I have PTSD. I have depression. And this is something that follows you throughout the rest of your life because as a child, you're so young, you're so vulnerable, and you're hit with all these things that, I mean, you have adults in our lives. Everyone does, and they're going through a divorce and people are like losing it. Imagine being a child and going through all of that, and you don't even have a legal way of getting out because if you're under 18, you can't go to a shelter because they'll return you to the perpetrator, and you can't get a divorce because you're not 18. So none of it honestly makes sense. And it's just like I said earlier, it's a domino effect that just trickles down. And if we don't nip it in the bud now, it's going to continue and continue and continue. And it's a generational curse that needs to be broken. And it affects women physically and mentally and in many ways that I think we all can relate to on here. And am I doing the next one? Social impacts?
I think it's Donna.
Okay.
Thank you, Nyla.
No problem.
Thank you so much, Nyla. And yeah, so everything that Nyla just shared, you can imagine how fatiguing it is to have to carry those mental health concerns and the toll that it takes on you physically as well. But I also wanted to touch on the social impacts and the harms that occur as a result of child marriage on a child socially. I think one of the things that people often miss when we talk about child marriage is that the damage doesn't just begin on that wedding day. It begins the moment that a child is treated as though they're no longer a child. And I can tell you this because I've lived it. When I was 16, as I mentioned, I was married off to a 31-year-old man. And right after that occurred, I tried to enroll in high school and to finish, my education in high school after I was taken out of the town that I was living in at the time, cross state lines. And instead of seeing a teenager who still deserved an education, the principal basically looked at me and essentially said, well, you're married now, you're an adult, it's going to be no time before you're pregnant, and we can't have that at our school. So I was turned away from continuing my education. And in that moment, I wasn't just denied access to school, I was denied access to peers my own age. I was also denied access to trusted adults and opportunities. And one of the last places that could have helped interrupt the abuse that I was experiencing turned me away. That is what child marriage does. It isolates children. The legal status of being married often changes how communities even respond to us. Nyla mentioned we can't go to domestic violence shelters. We also can't rent an apartment in our own name, oftentimes, because of how, you're treated entering into a contract, or even who has the income at 15, 16, 17 years old to be able to afford a place on your own. Teachers stop checking in. Neighbors assume that they're adults now making adult decisions. So the systems that are designed to protect children begin treating them as spouses instead. Isolation is one of the most powerful tools of coercive control because the less connected a victim is to education, employment, supportive relationships, and community, the harder it becomes to leave abuse. And those experiences don't simply disappear when the marriage ends. For many survivors, they become the foundation of complex PTSD, which is something that I am challenged with. Unlike trauma that's caused by a single event, complex PTSD develops from prolonged exposure to abuse, captivity, and control. And it changes how your nervous system functions. It affects your ability to trust, to regulate your emotions, form healthy relationships, and even for you to believe that you are worthy of safety. And when I speak about ending child marriage today, I'm not talking about changing one law. I am talking about interrupting an entire pipeline of trauma. Because child marriage doesn't just increase the risk of domestic violence, it increases educational disruption, economic instability, those chronic health problems we've mentioned, substance use, homelessness, and involvement with child welfare systems. And those impacts ripple across generations. I often say that child marriage isn't simply a marriage issue, it's a public health issue. It's an education issue. It's an economic issue, and it's a violence prevention issue. And when government allows a child to be legally married, it sends a dangerous message that exploitation can be legitimized with a marriage license. So our responsibility is to send a different message that no child's future should be determined by the person seeking to control them. Ending child marriage is not just about preventing one wedding, it's preserving childhood, protecting developing brains from lifelong trauma, and giving children the opportunity to become healthy, educated, thriving adults instead of lifelong survivors. And now I'll turn it back to Nyla to go over the economic impacts.
Okay, so the harms of child marriage and economically how it impacts everyone. Girls who marry underage are 31% more likely to live in future poverty. Teen mothers who marry, then divorce, more than double their likelihood of poverty. Girls who marry under age 19 are 50% more likely to drop out of high school and 4 times less likely to graduate college. This honestly resonates with me so much because I never got to finish high school and I got my GED. I had my son at 17. I got my GED at 18. I became an EMTB in at the age of 20. I then started college at the age of 24. I'm about 14 credits away from my bachelor's in psychology. And sometimes it really hurts me. Like it makes me think like who could I have been if I didn't go through all these hurdles? Like who I could have been like this. I could have ended cancer. Like I could have found a cure. It could have been anything. And like you are literally my parents, anyone who's making anyone go through a forced marriage, they stole our opportunities, our chances before we even had it. So like that's something that goes through my mind every day. But at the end of the day, I am very proud of how far I've come along, especially with Nyla's law and stuff like that. So maybe this was my path, and you have to like kind of let stuff like that go. Also, now, being a single mom and stuff, it's not easy, but you become who you are. It makes you who you are. And you just got to keep going. But we take the fighting chance away from our young girls when we put them in situations. It's kind of like when there's an unborn child and the mother's drinking and doing drugs. She's taking that child's opportunity away before that child can even develop it. And that's just the way I think about it, is how child Bryce, you just never know what kind of flower she could have blossomed into, because before she got a chance to blossom, she was withered down. And I don't know how else to say it other than that, but it affects you in every way. You don't get to finish college, you don't get to finish school, you're more dependent on the man financially. And it just trickles down, and it's a system that is just very lenient on one thing leads to another, and like Donna, like you said earlier, we need to like nip it in the bud from the bottom, because all child marriage can stem so many different issues. It can go into mental health, it can go into human trafficking, it's a wide variety, and it is so many things that have to be issued. But I think, getting to the bottom point of it and ending it, and hopefully with this new Child Marriage Prevention Act, we can get a better handle and better numbers and statistics and whatnot. So it's affecting women in every avenue of life.
Thank you so much, Nyla and Judy and Donna, for making this real for people. I think sometimes we over professionalize our conversations around this issue in ways that might allow people to ignore the severity of it. And so I am deeply grateful for the candidness of what you have shared today and your expertise. And I am incredibly grateful now to pass the microphone to Chastity Burns from Senator Durbin's office to talk about, in the face of all of this harm, what can we do about it? And so, Chastity, I will pass it off to you to walk us through some of the provisions of the Child Marriage Prevention Act.
Thanks, Casey. Thank you so much also for your support and your organization's support in working on this legislation and getting it to the point that it's at. It's been a long journey, but we couldn't have done it without you, as well as all of the other organizations that may be watching that have endorsed the bill, contributed really valuable feedback. Also want to thank our House lead and our co-sponsors in the Senate for supporting the bill. And a special shout out to all of the survivors, particularly the ones who have spoken today. We really appreciate your courage in speaking out about the issue. We also could not do this without your support and your advocacy. So very appreciative to all of you. So the Child Marriage Prevention Act is something that's been very important to Senator Durbin, something that I have been working on since I began in the Senate for over the last few years. And so we're very glad that we were able to reintroduce. I'm going to speak about some of the pieces of the bill that seek to reduce and end child marriage domestically and encourage the states to do so. So first, the bill directs the creation of a national commission to combat child marriage, and that commission would study the impact of child marriage in the U.S. and also provide recommendations on eliminating child marriage. The commission would be within HHS. It would have 10 members, and the commission would be directed to conduct a study on child marriage laws and or the lack thereof of laws to prohibit child marriage, as well as the extent of the occurrence of child marriage in each state. And then the recommendations from the commission would involve strategies to eliminate child marriage. And that commission would ultimately generate a report to Judiciary Committee, Health and Education and Workforce in the Senate and in the House. And then another component of the bill's domestic efforts to end child marriage would be incentives for states. First, the bill would authorize increased funding for states that ban child marriage, and that would be done through the Stop Violence Against Women Formula Grant Program, as well as the Sexual Assault Services Program. And states would be eligible for these increases in grant funding if they have a law in place that would prohibit child marriage for individuals who have not attained 18 years of age, or if more than 18 years of age, the age of whatever is majority in that state. So those are two of those components that address child marriage at the domestic level. And also, the bill includes state task force grants. So grants would be created for state task forces to examine child marriage and develop policy recommendations to protect individuals from child marriage and all of the abuses that come with it. The task forces would collect statewide stats, examine risk factors for the impacts of child marriage, and then develop recommendations that address these issues. And then ultimately, the task forces would prepare reports on how to protect vulnerable individuals who are impacted by child marriage. And then the bill also includes a directive to DOJ to create a model state statute. The Attorney General would be leading that effort. To develop a statute that states could use as an example of how to prohibit child marriage. And that would be done through a working group that would develop the statute and And the model statute would direct that that states require a person to be at least 18 at the time of marriage, and also allow a minor to petition to void such a marriage if it does occur. So, and I think I'm turning it over to Anna.
Yes, thank you, Chastity, and thank you to everyone who's joining us today, especially our survivors. Ms. Moore is very happy to be working with Tahirih and Senator Durbin's team. This has been a long-standing issue that she has been involved in and very interested in and preventing. So we're really glad that we could come together this Congress and update some of our language. So I'm going to talk about some of the immigration pieces to the Child Marriage Prevention Act. First, this bill would eliminate the consummation requirement in proxy marriage law. So currently, the proxy marriage requirement requires a couple applying for a spousal visa to be physically intimate after their proxy marriage, which is where one or more parties are not physically present for the marriage ceremony itself. And they have to be physically intimate after their proxy marriage for the marriage to be recognized as valid under immigration law. We are especially concerned about this because that can lead to sexual assault, it can lead to rape, and we obviously want to prevent that from happening. So we are aiming to repeal that specific provision in immigration law. This also sets a minimum age requirement for U.S. petitioners of spousal and fiancé visas to prevent children coming in to be married off for immigration purposes. So setting that age to be at least 18 years of age and to have been at least 18 years of age at the time of marriage to a foreign visa beneficiary, and also requiring beneficiaries to be at least 18 years of age when the petition is filed. We do have an exception in this provision for humanitarian visas, as we don't want to prevent women who are child married in other countries from being able to seek asylum here in the United States and get the help that they need to leave such marriages. So we did carve out a small exception for humanitarian visas in that immigration piece. And then the other two pieces are federal government land bans, so preventing child marriage on federal government land and in federal buildings, mainly military bases overseas where a lot of children do get married underage. So preventing that from happening on federal land. And then also a federal impact study. So having the Comptroller of the United States studying and reporting on the prevalence of child marriage within the marriage-based visa program, examining, among other things, the extent to which U.S. citizens and permanent residents sponsor foreign spouses who were under 18 at the time of marriage, and then also making recommendations as to whether foreign spouses should be required to have been at least 18 at the time of marriage. So that is a pretty high-level overview of the immigration pieces to this particular bill, and happy to answer any questions at the end if there's time.
Thank you so much, Anna and Chastity. And I really appreciate you covering the immigration provisions at sort of a high level. And I know that, for us here at Tahirih, Tahirih is an immigration legal aid provider. Many of our staff are experts in immigration law. I have a copy of the INA here on my desk, but it is very complicated even for those of us who are experts. And so I did just want to make sure folks are aware that we created an easy reference chart to display sort of the positive changes that this bill would make to our immigration laws in sort of a right now, what's the law and what would be true if we change the law. So you'll see current law in that first column. Right now, like Anna shared, there is no minimum age set by statute for how old a fiance or spousal visa petitioner or beneficiary need to be, which is what has led to these disturbing numbers that Nyla shared earlier, and her own personal experience. Once this bill passes, both the U.S. petitioner and the foreign beneficiary must be 18 at the time of filing for a fiance visa, no exceptions, and everyone must be 18 at the time of filing for a spousal visa, with a very narrow humanitarian exception, which Anna mentioned, and I'll talk a little bit more about in detail in a future slide. And then we look at the rest of the statute. And so another powerful piece of this legislation is that it would require, in the context of a spousal visa, that the U.S. petitioner be 18 at the time of marriage for that marriage to be valid for immigration purposes. And for all petitions where at least one party was under the age 18 at the time of marriage, USCIS would now newly require an interview of the parties separately to screen for coercion and other troubling dynamics in that relationship. And so you might be thinking, wait a second, doesn't the US spouse have to be 18 for the marriage to be valid for immigration purposes if this bill passes? Yes, is the answer, but that will only apply to marriages that take place after the law is enacted. And so for marriages that take place before the law is passed, we still wanted to have some safety net for those folks. So that's that interview requirement. And as Anna mentioned, we are going to remove the consummation requirement for proxy marriages. So these instances, I've heard folks who are mentors of mine who grew up maybe in a generation prior to me mention an episode of the show Happy Days, which might resonate with folks and might not. But in that TV show, we had a character who was deployed overseas during war, and he wanted to marry his high school sweetheart, and they married proxy marriage style over the phone. And where he was abroad, someone else, not his actual spouse, was standing like physically in the space where a spouse would stand during a wedding ceremony, and vice versa on the US side. That's what we mean by proxy marriage. People who get married, but they're not physically in the same space as each other when the wedding takes place. And as Anna shared, for those types of marriages to be valid for immigration purposes right now, the law actually requires proof of intimacy, which again incentivizes rape. And what we would replace that with is proof that those parties who married via proxy marriage have actually met in person in at least 2 years prior to the application for a spousal visa. And so just to talk a little bit more about the humanitarian exception. So this is really in the spirit of not forgetting about or abandoning already married girls in life-threatening circumstances overseas. And it is deeply rooted in consultation with culturally specific groups and groups that primarily work with and advocate for immigrant communities. So this bill does allow, in very rare instances, for the Secretary of Homeland Security to, in their discretion, approve a spousal visa petition filed when the foreign beneficiary is 16 or 17 years old for compelling humanitarian reasons on a case-by-case basis. This exception existed in the 2024 bill that was introduced, and based on feedback from folks, we actually were able to strengthen the language of this provision to narrow it to the impact that we were truly intending. And so to qualify for this exception, the foreign-born beneficiary who is 16 or 17 must credibly establish that they are at risk of individualized and targeted harm if the visa is not granted. And this limited exception is not available to individuals intending to reside in a state that would not have permitted them to marry under the laws of that state at the time of filing. And it is not available to fiancé petitioners at all. So what this means is that as more and more states ban child marriage, fewer and fewer humanitarian exceptions will be granted. So our immigration laws will rightfully evolve along with our state laws. And so because this bill, it's not a one-page piece of legislation, it's a comprehensive approach to child marriage in the United States, both as it is happening domestically and as it is happening through our immigration system, so that we don't leave any survivors out and we don't scapegoat any one particular community. Can be sort of a slog to get through it, and I know we have some frequently asked questions, and I also really want to share again the appreciation for the comprehensive approach and how important it is that we recognize age at time of marriage is the legal purview of the states. But there is so much that the federal government can do to make sure that there is sustained national attention and resources driven towards the elimination of child marriage in the US. And I think this bill brilliantly does that while also addressing a lot of the particulars of our immigration laws in other areas where the federal government is able to legislate effectively. And so one of honestly the most common questions that we get is, I can't believe it's 2026. How has it taken so long for us to kind of come around to this realization? And the truth is, it took a long time for, us as service providers, and policymakers in the US to realize that when we speak about and take action against child marriage globally, which we've been doing for decades, and funding programs to end child marriage around the world, we cannot forget that the US is a part of that globe. And I think we are very guilty of that in the United States, of thinking we are exceptional and, quote unquote, these kinds of things don't happen here. And so once it became obvious that action was needed domestically, it took time, and Chastity can speak to this, to thoughtfully draft this bill with input from people across different movements that are invested in this outcome and for whom this legislation will impact the people they serve, the people they love. And so you can go quickly and produce legislation that might feel like a band-aid and have unintended negative consequences, or you can move thoughtfully in consultation with lots of folks, and the result is a bill that is, I think, really well positioned to accelerate the domestic movement to end child marriage on the state level and really address that specific issue of child marriage being facilitated through our immigration system. And then finally, this is when I really hope that my colleagues with the links can share as I am talking. The other question is like, okay, well, this is maybe the first time I'm hearing of this, or I was kind of interested in learning more. I wasn't so sure, maybe skeptical, but now that you've learned about it and you've heard from the survivor advocates today, how can I get involved? And so there are many ways to get involved right now. One is everyone is still very welcome to endorse the bill. So in the next slide, I'll show sort of all the endorsing organizations and survivors that we had prior to introduction, which is always incredible to have a strong endorsement list prior to intro, but we are always open to adding more folks into this campaign and into this movement. So we have a link to endorse in the chat. I hope I can't see it because I'm sharing my screen. Another thing we have is this like really beautiful social media toolkit, which Donna, Judy, Nyla, and several other survivors who couldn't be here today, Genevieve, Sasha, and Brigitte, all contributed to, and their quotes are there, and we have graphics and stories. And so if you want to use your platforms, either individually or organizationally, to educate folks about the fact that child marriage is happening and that there is a comprehensive federal bill to address it that we need to get passed, we hope that you will use that social media toolkit to do that. And then finally, the biggest hurdle for us on this is educating members of Congress that this is happening in the United States and it deserves attention. And so we have sort of a click to email call to action to reach out to and educate your members of Congress. And so that will enable you to send a message both to your individual House rep and to your 2 senators in your state. And so we hope that you will take action in whatever way fits for you right now. And you are also very welcome to reach out to the Tahirih Justice Center or to Senator Durbin or Representative Moore's office at any time to learn more about ways to get engaged. And then I would be remiss if we didn't do a shout out to all of the organizations that did support this effort all along the way and were part of celebration of the introduction of the bill on July 17th, and all of the incredible child marriage survivor advocates that you also see listed here who have been consulting and providing input and supportive of this effort publicly. And so just at a glance, this is the current group of endorsing organizations. You can also see their logos on our campaign website. And we are deeply, deeply grateful to the large national groups, the culturally specific community-based groups, and everyone in between for taking this issue seriously and for endorsing this bill and trusting us on this issue. And so with that, I think we have timed this brilliantly. And I will just invite anyone who has follow-up questions or wants to get involved but isn't necessarily ready to click that endorsement link. You are more than welcome always to email me directly or to call me. And if there is interest ever, of course, in getting in touch with any of the other presenters that were on the webinar today, you're welcome to email me and I'm happy to put you in touch. So with that, I think I will just give one final shout out to my colleagues on the Forced Marriage Initiative, without whom none of this would be possible. who are doing another webinar soon. And they are going to be doing a forced marriage in the United States 101 webinar, and that will be on August 12th. And so if you found this valuable, if you found this educational, and if you think there are advocates and service providers and organizations within your networks that could use that training so that they can better screen for and provide services to survivors that might come forward with any number of the concerns that Nyla, Donna, and Judy shared today, and how to recognize and ask the right questions of those survivors such that you can get to the root of the problem and make sure you aren't missing the forced marriage that might be at the heart of the reason why they've come forward, which is so commonly overlooked. And so again, that link to register for that webinar is hopefully in the chat. That will be August 12th, and I'm deeply grateful for my colleagues on the FMI for putting that together. And we will wrap up and just say tremendous gratitude again to Dr. Judy, to Donna, to Nyla. You are incredibly courageous, as Chastity said, and so clear-eyed in your advocacy. It's truly so inspiring to work with you, and I'm so grateful. And just please, Anna and Chastity, pass on our gratitude to your bosses and, of course, to you both for your dedication and for your passion for this issue. It's really been a joy to work with you. Thank you, everyone.